we were getting lots of questions around, like, how can we trust you? Because ultimately, if something goes wrong, it's going to be really bad.
Catastrophic.
It's going to be very, very bad. First of all, it's going to be very bad for the company. It's also very bad for the person, right? Who convinces their organization to start using a particular tool. And so the open source aspect and the self-hostability aspect made it much more trustworthy. And it made it much more secure and reliable, and they see this community around it. Also, should I be looking at you, or
you can
what do people do?
Mix it up. If you want to say something profound, you can just go. Do you think we are just like slightly too close, aren't we? It's just a bit like
maybe
we're a little bit too close. Hi everyone, you're listening to Scaling Dev Tools. I'm joined today by Vlad from Infisical, which is an open source secrets management tool. Did I get that right?
Yeah, a secrets management platform or tool or tool set. I feel like we have lots of names for it now, but
So maybe I'll let you explain it, but I was explaining this to my roommate and he said, I've never really had an issue with secrets. Like, why do I need that? And I said, well, if we work on the same team, how do you send me this API keys? Slack? And then, he was like, oh yeah, I see why that's valuable.
Yeah.
And once you have a lot of people, maybe you're like someone that really shouldn't get hacked, really shouldn't have things compromised.
That's pretty much how it is. And it starts from kind of like the simplest use cases, right? Where you just have, like a 1 or 2 people team, where you need to just share secrets or environment variables. And really by secrets, what we mean is any type of secrets, right? It could be anything from like environment variables and different, even like non-sensitive configurations to, like encryption keys and database access tokens and certificates. And we do lots of things there, but it kind of like starts very simply, right? From just sharing it in between developers, and then goes to some much more advanced use cases where it's not as much about developers even, but more about infrastructure, right? If you have your Kubernetes clusters, how do you manage secrets there? Or how do you manage secrets in Terraform or in your Jenkins pipelines, or really anything, right? And the whole goal or the whole point or purpose of Infisical is so that you can have it centralized in a single secure location, so that you know who has access to your secrets. It's not sprawled across infrastructure in a way that you don't know even how many secrets you have or who has access to it, or, you don't have any auditability with what's happening. But instead, you centralize it, in a single location that's very secure, so you don't need to worry about that. It's all encrypted. And you have, perfect visibility around what's actually happening, which users and also which machines, kind of like service accounts, are able to use different secrets or access different secrets. And you're able to track every step of what's happening.
Yeah, it really makes so much sense. And I see in my day-to-day workflow, we're not using one, and we're not using Infisical yet. We should be. And it's like, even if you just want to go work on another laptop, you haven't got...
That's actually a great use case, right? It's like, for example, so it's kind of like developer onboarding, right? So like, imagine you get a new developer, they get a new laptop. How do they get access to the right secrets? Or you change your laptop, and then how do you get access to the right set of secrets again? Right? Or like you maybe like wipe your laptop because you wanted to do a reset, and then all your secrets disappear. But instead, you can just,
just like a productivity issue as well, because someone's got to wait around to there's someone else to send it to them, or like to figure out what it was and go get it from every application.
A lot about productivity and like productivity and efficiency and
Very cool. And so you've been growing a lot, and I know that one of the things that's been a big part of it is open source. Could you share a bit about actually maybe let's start at the beginning. Do you want to tell us a bit about the origin story of Infisical?
For sure. So actually it started closed source, right? And so for the first few weeks or maybe like 2 months or so, or something like that, Infisical was actually closed source. And I guess kind of like with any early stage startup, you learn a lot. And I think as we entered the space, we realized much more about what customers actually care about. And what people cared about is that us being an early stage startup, even though we provided a really great solution for a very particular use case of exactly this kind of like local development, secret management, and how to get secrets into applications and local machines and so on. But even though we provided that, we had lots of feedback of companies like, how do we trust you, right? Like, you're so young, you don't have any good customers yet. And that was very hard. And so what we realized, right, and that was not immediately obvious back then, is that a way to kind of like fight these concerns is to open source the product.
Interesting.
Yeah, and we open sourced it under the MIT license. Right now it works, like the core of the product is still available under the MIT. And then we have kind of like some add-ons on top. They're available in the enterprise edition. But the fact that we, just put it out there and every developer could inspect the code, people could even contribute their own integrations. And we have lots of both developers and companies, right? Like very large organizations who contribute their code to Infisical.
Super.
And we review it and test it and then approve it if it matches the direction that we were going at. But the kind of like open sourcing Infisical really allowed us to build trust in what people can do. And secondly, it kind of like very technically allowed people to self-host Infisical. So now lots of different developers and companies and in governments, they were able to self-host Infisical on their infrastructure. So oftentimes it's within their public cloud instances, whether it's AWS or GCP or Azure. But also oftentimes it's actually on their own data centers, right? So a lot of organizations that we work with, they're actually very large, and many of them haven't even moved to cloud yet. Or maybe it's like 2-3% of their infrastructure is actually on the cloud.
Wow. And when you have an MIT license and say like a government wants to use it, do you start working with them? Is it like they become a customer, or they just kind of go away and...
Yeah, well, they don't go away. At least in theory, they should. But I think there are different stages to that, right? Yeah. So what makes open source really convenient, especially for these kinds of tools where procurement processes can be pretty complicated, right? So if you want to use a secure, like basically, you're kind of like giving away the keys to the castle, right? Imagine like a large bank that comes to us, and then we would tell them that they need to use our cloud products. And so all of their like hundreds of billions of dollars would now be managed by this cloud tool that they never heard about before. They have lots of concerns. But if they're able to start self-hosting on their infrastructure, it's much easier for them to, first of all, test it. So this kind of like period becomes very simple. They oftentimes don't need to get any approvals for that because, again, Infisical is available with an MIT license. And then on top of that, it's also much easier to get it into production because, once again, it's much easier. People trust it much more. People see, we have, I think at this point, maybe like over 13,000 GitHub stars, and people see how, lots of other companies using it, and lots of companies opening issues, and lots of companies submitting pull requests and contributing. And they see this community around it. That's another, very important point of open source, because developers don't want to use, and we see that a lot also in very large companies. You don't want to use the tools that are closed down behind the talk to sales. Because usually these tools actually have very small community. And if you have a question, your only way is to like reach out to the company support, and maybe they'll help you, but it might take long. Whereas with Infisical, there's tens of thousands of developers. They're everywhere in like Stack Overflow and Reddit, and we have so much content that now it's on ChatGPT and Perplexity and anything. And this community is another point to why open source actually makes so much sense.
Yeah, that actually is like really helped me to understand it. So it's like basically, because one of my questions was actually going to be like, how I saw, you're working, you can say some of the big companies you're working with, right?
You're
working with like,
we work with a lot of customers from, some very small startups to some very big name AI companies like Hugging Face and HeyGen, a lot of AI companies. But also with very big, financial institutions and insurance companies and governmental institutions, telecom, manufacturing. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that was actually going to be one of my questions. Was like, how did you get these guys to like trust you with their biggest secrets after such a short amount of time? And I guess what you're saying is like, you're like, well, go look at the code. Like, here it is, and you can handle it. You don't need to trust us in a way.
That was in the beginning, right? Yeah. It was kind of like the step one of what we did. And lots of customers would self-host. Right now, I think we kind of like passed the point where Infisical is becoming like a pretty recognizable name, for like lots of CISOs now as like chief information security officers and lots of, like very large organizations. And because of that, it's also much easier for people to trust our cloud product. So lots of, very large organizations, they're actually using Infisical Cloud. In the beginning, it was basically like, we were getting lots of questions around, like, how can we trust you? Because ultimately what happens, right, is secrets management is so critical that if something goes wrong, it's going to be really bad.
Catastrophic.
It's going to be very, very bad. Yeah. And first of all, it's going to be very bad for the company. It's also very bad for the person, right? Who adopts the solution, who like convinces their organization to start using a particular tool. And so the open source aspect and the self-hostability aspect it basically made it much more trustworthy. And it made it much more secure and reliable.
I feel like even to like a kind of maybe slightly less disastrous, barely, I guess, but like Superbase, I feel like they did quite well in terms of at the beginning, it was like, well, don't trust us. It's Postgres.
Yeah.
You're, like this, and it's like slightly different approach. Right? It's open source. You can run it, you can inspect it, you can, which is saving you time.
They did it really great because otherwise, database is also incredibly critical. And you don't want to choose the wrong one. And it's arguably secrets management is more critical than your database. I feel like it's often said database is tier 1 infrastructure, but secrets management might be tier 0 infrastructure because the thing is, imagine you're a large organization, you're like a bank. Well, you have hundreds or thousands of different applications, both internal and external. But guess what? All of them connect to a single secrets manager solution. And so if your database is down, then only one of your applications is down. If your secrets manager is down, then potentially a lot of your applications are down. And so it's much more risky. And this kind of like availability concern is definitely something that our customers care about.
So with the big companies that start adopting you with the MIT license, what happens down the road? Do they come back and say, we want SLAs, we want these sorts of things?
Yeah, it's lots of features, right? And so how we work is we work on an approach that's similar to companies like GitLab, where the core of what we do is open source. And typically how we do it is that all the developer level functionality is available for free under the MIT license. And any developer can self-host it or try it out or run a POC or actually run, like in their home lab or it's pretty, amazing of how much you can actually do with our open source version. But then if you're using it in an enterprise context, most likely your manager is going to ask for more features or your CISO is going to come in and they're like, oh, we need maybe like this compliance certificate or we need this particular access control functionality or something like that, right? So when you're using it in a more complex use cases, then you'll probably need our enterprise edition.
Yeah, I think one of our previous guests, Flagsmith was saying that
Mhm.
a lot of the time people actually want to pay you as well. Is that something that you found?
Yeah, for sure. But you know, we're fine with that because we're getting lots of interest in what we do. And oftentimes companies maybe don't need some of the features that we have yet.
Yeah.
And it's totally fine. We love when people use our open source product. And oftentimes, companies come to us and, they start thinking about enterprise, and we actually actively recommend them to go the open source route, right? To just start using Infisical, because when we work with people to, for example, to buy the enterprise edition, we really want them to have a strong use case, right? And when people are just not sure, we actually recommend them to go with the open source edition, and then try it for 3 months, for 6 months, for a year, and then actually understand: do you need it or maybe not? Maybe your use cases are simpler, and kind of like our sales cycles are very fast.
Yeah, it must make it way easier if they've already been using it for a year.
Exactly. And so we make it much easier for everyone, right? Because those companies, they actually get to try out the tool and use it in production environments completely free, without any procurement, without any legal involved. And when the time comes and when they actually need something, they come to us, and they already know everything about Infisical and how it works, and they know what exactly they need. And so this kind of like conversation becomes very simple, because the customers know why they're reaching out to us.
Do you think you would have grown so fast if you hadn't gone for the MIT license, but you'd gone for something a little bit more restrictive?
That's a great question. I just like MIT license because it makes things so much simpler.
Yeah.
I feel like GitLab is actually a good example of a tool that started with an MIT license and stuck with it.
Yeah. Do they still have an MIT license?
They still have it until now. Yeah. And it's kind of like an open core approach. They do have enterprise kind of like functionality around it, but the core of the product is MIT. And I think actually a lot of tools that started with different licenses, they end up switching to something else. So I think, to be honest, I think an MIT license with these kind of like add-ons is probably one of the best approaches that you can take for a commercial open source company. Because
I was thinking, as you were saying, like when you said they don't need legal involved, I was just thinking if it was like a slightly more complex license, that might not be true if it's like a bank or something.
Exactly, because they have a list of licenses that are on the allow list for developers to use. Absolutely.
So they're always...
and if it's some kind of like unconventional license, like for example, some companies create their own licenses, especially as they get larger, and they try to be very creative with that and like put in lots of clauses. Well, guess what? Now no enterprise can actually use you, because now they need to get through this multi-week, and these legal approval process can be so lengthy that developers just don't want to do that, because especially in banking, right? Developers, they have their task or they have their goal of what they want to achieve, and they just want to get the easiest way possible. And if they have the task for like this quarter and the approval process is going to take a quarter, they're not going to use that tool anymore. So I think the license is very important. MIT is good. If people are starting out, I would probably recommend this. I guess you do need to be, thoughtful about what goes to MIT and what goes into Enterprise Edition, because you don't want to create barriers for features that are needed by developers, but you also maybe don't want to, keep free features that
managers features.
That managers might need.
And just trying to, because I've never been a part of a team that's succeeded in this approach. If they're like, how does it look like typically at a bank where it's just like a team and there's like one developer in like a 10-person team and they adopt it? Like, is there like some, and then they start telling people, like, how does it typically kind of?
Well, first of all, is something that was not immediately obvious to us is that a lot of very traditional organizations, right? So anywhere from steel manufacturing to transportation to banking to insurance, they actually have incredibly large engineering teams.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes it's thousands or tens of thousands of engineers. So it depends on how large the company is, but it could be much more. And it's typically their engineering teams is larger than, for example, a mid-sized tech company would have. Obviously not large as Microsoft or like those types of companies, but it depends on how they adopt it. But sometimes they could adopt it organization-wide. Sometimes they could adopt it for particular applications that they're developing on a team level. And then they recommend their friends. Sometimes what happens is our users and our customers, they switch jobs and then they join a new company and then they introduce Infisical to a new company as well. So yeah, I feel like there is lots of ways there is lots of ways the way Infisical spreads.
Yeah. Is it something that you kind of like think about, or is it this kind of, you just grow the project, you keep on, it becomes more popular and then, it's suddenly a wild bank appears and starts using it.
This growth is, it maybe looks very organic, but we definitely think about it a lot, right? Like, how do we make it simple for people to adopt? How do we, just like make it very easy and make this decision process very easy for why Infisical, right?
Yeah. Are there any examples of things that were like harder and you made them easier?
Like it's just how you self-host Infisical, right? So in the beginning when we launched it, you needed actually lots of configurations for what you need to specify, like lots of different JWT tokens and lots of different environment variables and so on to actually set up Infisical, and it would take a solid amount of time. And what we do now is actually much simpler, and lots of these processes are automated, and you can just kind of like it depends on if you want a highly available environment or not, but we are trying to do lots of these scenarios as simple as possible, and so we spend lots of time there. And so this allows people not only kind of like get to the production deployment easier, but also just try things out. Like you can just run Docker Compose up and have your instance in a few minutes.
Is there anything that's like, because you're kind of building like a team product, like probably not many like solo developers relatively are like, a lot of the value is unlocked when it's like multiple people involved. Is there anything you do to like make it, do you know what I mean? Like,
to like expand to more developers in the organization, or
you kind of want to help them get other people to use it as well.
So, for sure, there's lots of things that we do. We recently launched this tool for secret sharing, right? So even though developers use secrets management as part of their organization, sometimes you just need to share a secret, for example, on Slack. And it's not just an infrastructure secret, but it could actually be any sensitive data that you need to send to your colleagues, or maybe outside of your organizations, to consultants or contractors or your customers. So what you can do is we have this tool. It's called share.infisical.com. And you can put in any piece of sensitive data there, and you can generate this end-to-end encrypted link. And you can,
that's cool.
You can make it work so that, it's only viewable once. And then you can send it to anyone else without actually worrying for it to be exposed to internet.
Yeah, that's super cool. I think like I was using like my password managers to send this sort of thing, but it makes a lot more sense to do it project wide. It always felt like a kind of a hack to be using. Yeah.
So but that also allows lots of other stakeholders within the organization to find out about Infisical, because when we work with organizations who are, for example, like 20,000 employees, obviously not everyone is going to know about Infisical.
But
like these types of tools that we create, And like shared.infisical.com is also available for free, so you don't need to create an account or anything like that. But it lets people kind of like learn about Infisical and what we do.
Yeah, and I guess like you don't need to be a developer to use that as well.
Oh yeah, not even. Yeah. You can be anyone, a marketing specialist or anything.
Do you ever get like adopted by non-developers? It's kind of like a rogue question.
No.
Product managers, like we need.
No, never really product managers. Yeah, I mean maybe in future we have more products. Yeah. But right now we really are focusing on developers and infrastructure engineers and DevOps engineers and SRE engineers and security engineers. So everyone in the engineering space.
Yeah. Okay. Makes total sense.
Yeah.
So apart from making it super easy to adopt and kind of word of mouth, what are you doing anything else to kind of, fan the flames?
To kind of like spread it within the organization or to new organizations or?
Just general grow adoption, whether that's...
Yeah. For sure. We do a lot of marketing. A lot of different. We are like always on Hacker News on Reddit. We have our own blog. We publish lots of things there, and we have this. I think the other thing that we do well is to have this kind of like very strong community around the product, and community is also something that you can't really control, right? Oftentimes it's kind of like very independent, right? And it's just kind of like, you don't even know it. And then people somewhere in France, they organize a meetup about Infisical, or someone like speaks about it at a conference or something like that. And so it's like completely organic, but also because we are open to a lot of different people around the world, and we talk to them, and we have this kind of like forum workspace for them, for anyone to join, and people can ask questions or propose their feedback or anything. It kind of like creates this community aspect where people use it for their personal projects, and they tell their friends and they tell their colleagues, and
What brings people together, would you say? Because to me, I guess like it would be like secrets management is one of the ones where like, I think you said it yourself, as like it tends not to be like, it's not the driver of the project. Usually it's like the sort of thing that you want to make sure it doesn't go wrong.
Yeah.
Of like, how do you think like people, what do people like come together on Infisical?
You mean the community or customers?
Yeah, is it like people, is it like they like that you're obsessed with security? They like that they are also open source contributors to it. They're the advocates within their organization. Like what? Because I guess like whenever there's a community, I always feel like people kind of identify with it in some way, and it becomes part of their personality as a developer.
I think they like what we do in a way that I think we really target a lot of security conscious developers, and I think on every team, especially kind of like on the early stage teams, right? There's always this developer who is more security conscious and is kind of like always talking about, different new tools that they should adopt, or different practices or different processes that they should follow. And so I think a lot of these developers like what we actually do and kind of like our approach to security, right? Because another thing that we do is that secret management is important for, especially if you are, a high-risk organization, like you're in banking or healthcare or something like that. It's very important, and you really think about it. But the thing that also made Infisical, I think, successful is that, first of all, you can use, there are other secret management tools, and you can use it. But if it's too complex, or if it's not obvious for your developers of how to use it, then it will not stick, really. And then what happens is you adopt it for your organization, but it's sometimes so complicated, as if it's almost kind of like actively hostile to developers. And so what happens is that you think that your developers are using it, but developers actually find ways around it. And so what's happening is even worse, right? Because then you get
full sense of...
you think that everything is going well, but actually it's not, until something terrible happens and you have a security breach or something like that.
They're pasting it around in Slack.
Yeah, no, but even at large, organizations like Mercedes-Benz and AstraZeneca, right? Like they are using different secret management solutions, but because they're so kind of like arcane and so complicated, it's impossible to actually get developer adoption across the organization. It's a very complex issue that we also work kind of like very closely with organizations on. And it's just very important because you can have the most secure tool, but if it's not easy enough, developers are not going to use it.
That makes total sense. I can imagine like it actually fitting really well into like all this like organizational change stuff where like, how fast can someone get set up and actually like push to production, if it seems to fit within that. And when you were talking, I was thinking of that, that book that's like, I can't remember, the Unicorn Phoenix Project or whatever, where it's like, it takes someone like 5 weeks to actually get permission for everything. And stuff. And like, yeah. Interesting. That's super cool. And one of the things that we were talking about just off camera was I was saying, what stage you're at, what are things like? And you were talking about these like mini games.
Yeah.
Could you share a little bit about
So it's actually not my concept, right? So when we were at Y Combinator, we would talk to Dalton Caldwell, who is one of the maybe earliest group partners at Y Combinator. And one of the concepts that he has is it's kind of like startups is a series of mini games, right? And from the stage where you're, a 2-people startup in a garage to the stage where you are NVIDIA, right? Or like this ginormous public company, really, there is maybe like 15 different levels that you need to advance. But the interesting part is that kind of like as you advance to a new mini game, right? As you go from like a 2-people startup to just, starting to get your first employees to when you're like 15 people and you also have like not just engineers maybe, but like you go in different directions and you have sales and marketing, and then you need to scale these, and then you be like multi-product, and then you IPO and all of these, right? And so the thing is, like these stages, they kind of like last a certain period of time, and you need to kind of like deserve to go to the next stage. But sometimes you also switch these levels too fast, right? Because, some startups, they grow very fast. And so what happens is you kind of like don't realize that you're at a new minigame. It's just very important to realize that kind of like as you go to a new minigame, the rules will change for how you actually do, right? When you are a 2-people startup, you really care about kind of like very early stage product development, right? And it might need to change because at some point you have kind of like a very good product base, and then you kind of like advance more on that, and you define your ideal customer profile, and you kind of like really realize who you're building it for, right? And so, I mean, you can probably talk about it for hours about different stages, but it's just this very interesting concept of how
rules change.
How the rules change, and kind of like sometimes every couple of months, you need to kind of like change what you're doing and kind of like look back and realize, oh, we're actually at a different stage now, and we need to be doing different things.
Yeah. So have you got any examples of like rules that have changed for you recently?
Yeah, I guess one of the examples that we're talking about is for a long time, we had, a very, very lean team, right? It was pretty much just founders, and we were kind of like keeping it very lean. And we were kind of like building out this product base. So right now, what's different is that we actually are, actively hiring. We constantly kind of like need to remind ourselves that we need to think about how to grow in physical, because there's just too many things and too many customers and too many projects that we want to work on. And we kind of like don't have enough people to actually go into these directions that we would love to pursue. And so it's different, right? And it also works different with sales, because you kind of like you start doing sales yourself. and it's kind of like early stage sales, especially in developer tooling. It's a lot about trying to figure out what developers need, and kind of like building the product with them very closely, and kind of like trying to build the best product possible for what different people need. But as you advance, right, the sales is different, and you already have this base product, right? And it's starts being more about different recommendations that you provide to people, right?
Yeah.
You start working with these larger and larger enterprises, and it's much more about, hey, like I think for this scenario, or like for your type of infrastructure, you should go this route, or you should go that route, right? And so it's more about that, and kind of like, it just changes, right? And then you get your sales team, and then you start doing marketing differently and product development differently. Because also, like with product development, it's maybe one of the biggest examples, because when you are small and you don't have any customers yet, or maybe you have very few customers, you need to explore all the different directions that you could go at, right? And start building lots of different functionality. When you have hundreds or thousands of customers, you really need to make sure that the things that you release, that they're reliable, and because lots of people will see them immediately as you release them. And it definitely is the case for us as well, because we started with just secrets management. Right now we do more different things like secret scanning and secret sharing. And so another new thing that we launched is certificate management. Basically all the certificate lifecycle around infrastructure. And it's very interesting, right? Because it's very different from just launching secrets management from the start, because now we have all this user base that already knows what Infisical is, and they tend to adopt things much quicker. And it's kind of like a very different challenge in a way.
Yeah, and certificates is more complex, I feel like.
Even certificate management?
It's more complex, right?
It's definitely more complex. It's kind of like for a very specific type of organizations.
You mentioned kind of hiring, and on another podcast interview that you did on Code Story, you said something that I thought was quite interesting. You said that you wanted to hire people that really wanted to work on Infisical, or I can't remember your exact wording, but it was like passionate about Infisical.
I think we always do that, right? It's kind of like, I think we have an incredibly strong team, and so folks are interested in applying. We have infisical.com/careers, so you can please submit your application. We are actively hiring for a lot of different positions. But we really look for kind of like folks that are passionate about security and developer tooling and infrastructure tooling, and some of people that we hire, they're for example, are open source contributors.
Interesting.
And some of them, for example, used Infisical before for their personal projects or in some other organizations. And
they must make the best hires.
They really understand what Infisical is, and so they're really excited because maybe some of them brought it to their previous organization or something like that, and then they're really excited about what we do at Infisical.
Wow, so that's another perk of open source.
For sure, because it's so open, and it's like this openness is something that we really embrace, right? We kind of like have a public handbook with like all the different things that we do at our company. That people can read before they get into Infisical. And
so GitLab's been a big inspo for you guys.
For sure. I mean, they're also a Y Combinator company, and we talked to Sid in the very early days.
Nice. Amazing. Okay, I think we're probably coming up to time. Oh, definitely over time. Thank you so much, Vlad.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Is there anything that you wanted to share?
Apply at infisical.com/careers. That's the main message. And if you need help with securing your secrets, then Infisical might be the right tool for you to check out.
Yes, I definitely think so. Thank you so much, Vlad.
Thank you for inviting me.
For listening.
Thank you.
Awesome.